Welcome back to the channel today. Today we are going to pot up some tomato plants. You might wonder, when do you do that? What I do is, like this little plant here, it has its first true set of leaves, and then it has the second set of leaves coming. And that is the time when I would transplant my tomato plants. And another reason I'm transplanting my tomato plants now is you don't want your tomato plants or any of your plants to get root bound. And what root bound means is the root has taken up all the space in the cell. So it just fills the cell with roots. And what happens is it starts to circle around and around the pot, the plant. The roots start going in a circle. And then they don't develop a lot of the beneficial hair roots that the plant needs. They grow more of a rope type of root that goes around and around the pot. And you really want your plants to have hair roots on them. The hair roots is what takes up the water, the moisture out of the soil for the plant, and it also takes up the nutrients out of the soil for the plant. And so if you have just a plant that has very few hair roots and it's got that bigger, thicker root that is circling around inside of the pot, what it actually does is it stunts your young plant. And you will see that later on when your plant isn't bearing a lot of fruit and it doesn't get to be a nice, big, robust plant. And the root will actually form a memory of that, of growing that way. I've had plants out in my garden that were root bound. And in the fall, when I'm cleaning up my garden and I pull them out, those roots are still going around and around. And so that, I don't want my plant to get that memory in it. And I want as many hair roots on my plant as I can get. So that's why, that when I plant them up is critical as far as the future of your plant. So this is the time when you're gonna transplant your seedlings into a little bit bigger pot. You don't want to put them in a great big pot right now. Just plant them up. What I use is I have these biodegradable bags. I use a lot of soil blocks, but this year, soil is so expensive this year that I started using these last year. And these work on the same premise as a soil block. The roots come right through this fabric, and they say they're biodegradable. I tested that last year in my garden. When you plant, you can plant the whole bag and all down into your soil, into your garden soil. And this bag is supposed to biodegrade. Well, up here in Alaska, it didn't. I don't think our soil is warm enough for that. Maybe in the lower 48, where your soils are a lot warmer than ours and you have a longer growing season, that would do that, but they don't do that here in Alaska. So I just cut the bag off and then plant them. But what your plant does, your roots do in these bags, is they come through the sides of the bag and then they air prune themselves off. And that's the same thing that a soil block does. So your roots are continually growing, and they're growing hair roots because they're not circling. But when the root comes out the side of the bag or the side of the soil block, it like dies off. It air prunes itself off. But the plant still thinks the root system is growing. And so your plant continues to grow and it thinks it has a nice, robust root system, and that signals the plant to grow. And so these work really well for that. And the only con I have with these is they dry out inconsistent. And what I mean by that is I can have a whole flat of these, you know, like here, and they're all in the same soil and they're same plants and everything's the same, done the same way with them. But 4 or 5 of these will all of a sudden be just bone dry. They just dry right out. And the other ones are not. I don't know why it happens, but you have to, when you're using these bags, you have to pay real close attention to your watering. And some are going to dry out faster than others, but it's I'll deal with that to get the benefit of the air pruning on the plant. And then it takes, soil blocking takes a lot of soil, and these don't take as much soil. So that's kind of why I'm using them this year, is to save on my soil a little bit. But, so what I do is, and then I take a Sharpie and I write right on the bag what the plant is. And then I don't have to have all the plant stakes in here. So what I'm going to do is I'll get one that I got labeled. Is I take and I roll the bag down, and then I put a little bit of soil in the bottom. Like so. And move these so maybe you can see better. And I put a little soil down in the bottom. And then I have my little scooper tool. This came with a seed, some seeds that I got. And they actually call it a weeder. But I find that it scoops out my seedlings fairly nice out of my cells. And so I scoop that up. You see it's got a nice little root system on it already. And I just set that down into my pot, and I fill the soil up around it. Now, tomato plants will develop roots all along the stem. Whatever part of the stem is in contact with the soil, roots will grow off of that stem on your plant. And so the idea with the tomato plants is to plant as much of the stem in the ground as you can to get the nicest root system for your plant that you can get. And I fill the soil up almost to the first leaves. I don't worry about the little very first set of leaves, because they're just gonna turn yellow and die off. But I'm talking about the true leaves, the true tomato plant leaves. And then I fill them up and I give them a little watering. I water them pretty good to make sure that there's no dry spots into the pot when I first transplant them. That way, wherever those little roots go, they will have moisture. And it does disturb the roots a little bit when you plant them, and it'll shock them just a little bit, but if you're careful with them, it isn't going to hurt them at all. In fact, you have to do it. So that's what I do. And then another nice thing about these bags is, as my plant grows, the stem gets longer, I can unroll these bags and top off the top of them with more soil. And so the length of this bag is like this. So by time the tomato plant goes into the next size pot up, it has this full length of this bag as root system on the stem already, because I planted at the bottom and then I just fill the soil up as the plant grows. So they work really, really well for that. Let's put a little more on this one. And what I do, tomatoes, there's 4 critical times to fertilize a tomato plant. And the first time is at this point right here, when you're potting them up for the first time. They got, the first set of true leaves, getting the second set. When you fertilize them at this age, they're young and they're tender. Whatever fertilizer that you're using, use it half strength. I'm using a tomato fertilizer today that's a little bit higher in nitrogen. You can give your tomato plants, I've used the Alaska fish fertilizer, which is nitrogen at this stage. When they're little like this and you're wanting them to grow and you want them to get leaves, you give them a little higher nitrogen at this stage. If you continue to give them the higher nitrogen fertilizer as they're growing, you will have beautiful green lush plants. They will look beautiful. But in the end, you won't get as much fruit on them if they have too much nitrogen. And so at this stage, you want to give them a little more nitrogen. And then as I go through my different stages of the tomato plants, I'll be doing videos at each stage. I'll talk about what to fertilize with at that stage. But for right now, you can give them a little more nitrogen, but just give it half strength. So whatever your directions on your fertilizer says how to mix it half. Like, if it says to put a tablespoon of fertilizer in a gallon of water, you're going to put a half a tablespoon in. So because they're tender and you don't want to burn them, you don't want to over fertilize them at this point, but they do need a little bit of fertilizer now for their growth. So we'll just put, I kind of tamp the dirt down a little bit, the soil down a little bit in the bottom of the bag. You do the same thing if you're doing in a little pot too. Plant your, see this one here? See, this is a really, if I can get it, this is a really good example of that root wanting to start to circle. You want to put your plant in at the bottom of your pot. This is a really nice plant. And then start filling your soil up. When you hold your plant, don't hold it by the stem because you don't want to kink this. You don't want to bend the stem, you don't want to mush it. And sometimes you hold it a little harder than you think you do. So what you can do is just take your little leaves and hold your leaves up and then put your soil in around. You want to be gentle with them at this point. And then I just roll my bag up a little bit. It's one thing I like about the bags is I can adjust how high I can put my soil around my plant. And I want to put it up to almost to the first set of leaves. And then I give them a nice drink. And I water them in really well. And there's the little plant. When I have 2 tomatoes together in one cell, I just very carefully kind of jiggle them apart to try to not break any more roots than need be. And then it goes right down into the into the pot. And I hold them by the leaves and not by the stem because I don't want to pinch that stem at all. Some people think that the little hairs on the tomato plant will grow the roots. They don't. Actually, the little hairs give you this, make the tomato smell like a tomato. The plant smell like a tomato. The stem actually has nodes on them. You don't see it so much when they're little, but they're there. They have nodes on them, and then the roots grow out of those nodes. And sometimes if you have a tomato plant in a pot and you know, like this much above the soil, an inch or two above the soil, you'll see these knobby things on the stem. That's what those are. Now, if you put soil up on those, they're going to grow roots because those are the nodes. You see the nodes more as the plant gets bigger, but they're there even when they're little. They're there. You know, so the trick is to get as much root system as you can get and as many hair roots on your plant as you can get, because the hair roots is what takes up your nutrition and your moisture for your plant. When you're starting your seeds, and it's so easy to do and I am so guilty of it, you want to think ahead of when you're going to pot these plants up and the room that you're going to need underneath of your grow lights once they're potted up. You can put a lot of plants, a lot of seeds underneath of your grow light in the cell packs, in the little plastic cell packs. But those plants have to be potted up, and they have to be able to be underneath the grow light. And so if you pot up a crazy amount of seeds, you know, you're going to need a crazy amount of grow lights and a crazy amount of shelves. Because what happens is you can have, you know, beautiful little plants like this, and if you don't have enough room to put them on underneath your grow lights, they're going to start suffering, even though you've done everything right. So my advice is to grow what you can manage underneath your grow lights once they're potted up like this. Now these I won't pot them up again until I can put them out into the greenhouse, because they have a lot of area to grow now. The roots will air prune off the side of the bags, and I can get a lot more mileage out of it, if you will, than if I put them like into a little plastic pot, because they're only going to be there so long, and then I'm going to have to repot them up, and I'm not going to have any place to put them. They go from the trays to these bags, and then they'll go from the bags into a 1-gallon pot. And depending on what kind of spring we have and how warm it gets, they'll either go from the 1-gallon pot right into the regular, because I grow my tomatoes in pots in the greenhouse. They'll go into the pot they're going to grow in for the year. Or if it's still cold outside, but I have to get them potted up again, I'll put them in a 3-gallon pot. My tomatoes generally grow for the season in a 7 to 10-gallon pot. I used to grow them in 5-gallon pots, and I just found that it just didn't seem like it was enough. And so a lot of my pots are 7-gallon, 8-gallon. I do have a few 10-gallon pots that I use. And you just have to, you know, be on top of your fertilizing and your watering and stuff like that. But again, I just don't ever want them to be root bound. So that is how I pot up my tomatoes. And thank you for watching today. As always, like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you next time.